While America argued about robot taxis and self-driving software updates, a car quietly rolled off a line in Shenzhen wearing a sticker price of $11,999 and a laser scanner bolted to its roof. It is not a golf cart. It is not a quadricycle. It is a real car with a real crash structure, a real battery, and driver assistance hardware that American automakers still charge luxury money for. The cheapest new electric car you can legally buy in the United States costs $28,995. That is not a price difference. That is a message, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that message says about the next 10 years of American manufacturing, why Detroit is more afraid of this car than they are of Tesla, and why the most important thing about it is not the price at all. So let's get into it. Let's start with the car itself, because the number sounds fake until you look at what's attached to it. The car is the BYD Seagull. In its home market, it launched its newest generation this year, with prices running from roughly 69,900 yuan up to about 85,900 yuan. Convert that, and you land in a band that runs from about $10,300 at the very bottom to about $12,600 at the top of the standard range. The trim most people actually buy, the one with the bigger battery, the better interior, the longer range, sits right around $11,999. $11,999. Now, I want you to sit with what that number represents, because Americans have gotten very used to hearing cheap Chinese car and mentally filing it next to a lawnmower engine and a plastic dashboard. That mental image is about a decade out of date, and holding on to it is going to cost people a lot of money. Here's what $11,999 buys. You get a lithium iron phosphate battery pack, the Blade battery, BYD's own design, built by BYD in a BYD factory, using cells BYD manufactures itself. Range options run to about 405 kilometers on China's testing cycle, which realistically lands somewhere in the 200-mile neighborhood in normal driving. For a car that is fundamentally designed as an urban commuter, that is not a compromise. That is comfortably more than most Americans drive in 3 days. You get a battery chemistry that doesn't catch fire the way early lithium packs did, that tolerates thousands of charge cycles, and that holds a large majority of its original capacity well past the point where most owners would have sold the car anyway. You get a full digital cockpit, a rotating central touchscreen, voice control, over-the-air software updates, connected car app functionality, and on the higher trims, this is the part that made the industry sit up, you get LiDAR, an actual roof-mounted laser scanner feeding an advanced driver assistance system capable of navigation-assisted driving on highways and in cities, plus automated parking. Let me put that in perspective, because it matters more than anything else in this video. LiDAR is the sensor that was supposed to be the expensive one. It is the sensor Elon Musk publicly dismissed for years, in part because it was too costly to put in a mass-market car. 10 years ago, a single automotive-grade LiDAR unit cost more than a used Honda Civic. It was the technology that separated a $200,000 research vehicle from a normal car. It is now sitting on the roof of the cheapest car in one of the largest markets on Earth, on a vehicle that costs less than the average American spends on a used sedan. That is not a price war. That is a technology curve bending so hard that it snapped the assumptions the entire Western auto industry was planning around. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The cheapest new electric vehicle you can buy in the United States today is the reborn Chevrolet Bolt, starting at $28,995. That's the floor. That's the best America currently offers. And General Motors has already confirmed the Bolt is a limited-run model. It's scheduled to end production in 2028, after roughly 18 months, with the plant converting over to build a Buick SUV. So the cheapest American electric car costs somewhere in the region of 2.5 times the Seagull, and it's leaving. Now, I know what a lot of you are already thinking. Cheap means cheap. Cut corners, bad steel, it'll fall apart. And I want to address that directly rather than dance around it, because that assumption is the single most dangerous thing an American manufacturing worker can believe right now. But before I do, we need to answer the question that actually matters. Not what the price is, how, because a price is just a number. The engineering that makes the number possible, that's the bombshell. And once you understand it, you'll understand why the people who run American factories have been having very quiet, very serious meetings about this for the last 18 months. There is no single trick here. That's the first thing to understand, and it's the thing that makes this so hard to counter. If it were one trick, Cheap labor, government subsidy, corner cutting, you could neutralize it with one policy. Tariff it, ban it, subsidize against it, done. The reason this is a genuine strategic problem is that the $11,000 car is the output of about 15 separate advantages stacked on top of each other, each one shaving a few $100s, compounding into a number nobody else can reach. Let me walk you through the stack. Advantage 1, they own the battery. In a typical electric car, the battery pack is somewhere between a third and 40% of the total cost of the vehicle. Most automakers buy their cells from a supplier. Panasonic, LG, Samsung, CATL, every one of those suppliers takes a margin. Every one of them has its own factory overhead, its own shareholders, its own profit target baked into the price per kilowatt hour. BYD does not buy cells. BYD started as a battery company. It made rechargeable batteries for mobile phones before it ever made a car, and it entered the automotive business by buying a struggling automaker and pointing its existing battery expertise at it. That is completely backwards from how every Western automaker approached electrification, and it turned out to be the correct order. So when BYD builds a Seagull, the single most expensive component in the car is being produced internally, at cost, with no supplier margin, using a chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, that deliberately avoids cobalt and nickel. Those are the two most expensive, most geopolitically volatile inputs in a battery. LFP is less energy dense, so you get less range per pound. For a long-range luxury sedan, that's a real trade-off. For a small city car, it is functionally free money. Advantage 2, cell-to-body construction. The Blade battery isn't just a pack that gets bolted into the car. The cells are long, flat blades arranged like a honeycomb, and that structure gets integrated directly into the vehicle's floor as a load-bearing element. Think about what that eliminates. In a conventional design, you build a battery module, then you build a pack housing, then you build a floor structure, then you bolt the pack to the floor. That's 4 separate engineering problems, 4 sets of tooling, 4 sets of parts, 4 sets of assembly labor, and a lot of redundant metal doing the same job twice. Integrate them, and you delete an entire layer of the car. Less material, less weight, less assembly time, fewer fasteners, a stiffer chassis as a bonus, which improves crash performance and handling at the same time. That's not cost cutting. That's design elegance producing cost reduction as a side effect, which is a fundamentally different and much more dangerous thing. Advantage 3, vertical integration everywhere else. 2. The battery is the headline, but it doesn't stop there. BYD produces its own electric motors, its own power electronics, its own semiconductors. The company has a dedicated chip subsidiary, which is why it sailed through the global chip shortage that shut down assembly lines across America and Europe for months. It builds its own seats. It has produced its own ships to move its own cars. Every one of those is a supplier margin that simply doesn't exist in the bill of materials. Western automakers spent 30 years doing the exact opposite. The entire management philosophy from the 1990s onward was to outsource everything that wasn't core. Own the brand, own the design, own the final assembly, let someone else own the messy business of actually making things. It looked brilliant on a balance sheet. Return on capital went up, factories came off the books, and it worked, right up until the moment the thing being outsourced turned out to be the competitive advantage. Advantage 4, scale that distorts physics. BYD is not a small company making a niche product. It sells millions of new energy vehicles a year, has crossed 1 million in a single partial year, and exports hundreds of thousands of units abroad. The Seagull alone delivered somewhere approaching 450,000 units in a year, making it one of the best-selling electric vehicles on the entire planet. When you order components at that volume, you are not negotiating a price. You are setting one. Suppliers restructure their entire businesses around your forecast. Every fixed cost, tooling, engineering, software development, crash testing, homologation, gets divided across a number so large that the per-unit share rounds toward nothing. Advantage 5, a domestic supply chain that is physically close together. This one gets overlooked constantly, and it's enormous. The battery material processing, the cell production, the magnet production, the electronics, the assembly, a huge share of it sits within the same country, often within the same few industrial regions. Parts move hours, not weeks. There is no ocean freight in the middle of the value chain, no customs delay, no currency exposure between step 4 and step 5. Every mile of distance in a supply chain is cost, and it's also risk, and risk is also cost. Advantage 6. The price war itself. Here's the part that Americans find hardest to understand. The Chinese domestic auto market is not a comfortable place to be a car maker. It is the most brutally competitive automotive market that has ever existed. There are dozens of serious electric vehicle brands fighting for the same buyers, and they cut prices constantly, aggressively, sometimes multiple times a year. That environment is miserable for margins, but it functions like an evolutionary pressure cooker. Every company that survives it has been forced to become an extraordinary cost engineer because the alternative was extinction. The seagull didn't get cheap because someone decided to make it cheap. It got cheap because a dozen competitors were trying to kill it every single quarter, and BYD had to keep finding new ways not to die. American automakers spent that same decade optimizing for something else entirely: high-margin trucks and SUVs sold to buyers with strong credit, which was, to be fair, extremely profitable. It just didn't build the muscle that this fight requires. So stack it all up. Own the battery, integrate it structurally, own the motors and chips, spread fixed costs across enormous volume, keep the supply chain compressed into a small geography, and season it with 10 years of gladiatorial cost pressure, and you get $11,999. Not because anyone cheated, because that's what the system produces. Now, I promised earlier I'd come back to the obvious objection, and I'm not going to skip it, because it's the one thing standing between most Americans and taking any of this seriously. Isn't it just a bad car? Here is the honest answer, and it has two halves. The first half: no, not in the ways that people assume. The Blade battery isn't a compromise part. It's one of the more thoroughly validated pack designs in the industry, and its safety record under abuse testing is a large part of why other manufacturers, including some very well-known ones, buy those exact cells for their own vehicles. When a company you trust is putting the same battery in the car you're considering, the cheap means unsafe argument gets very difficult to sustain. The structure is real steel with a real crash cage. These cars are homologated for European sale, which means they clear European crash and safety standards, and Europe does not grade on a curve for imports. Several Chinese electric vehicles have come through European safety testing with top-tier results, not passing marks, top tier. The second half of the answer is more nuanced, and I'd be doing you a disservice to skip it. $11,999 does buy you a small car. The Seagull is roughly the footprint of a Kia Picanto, under 12.5 feet long. It is not going to haul a family of 5 and their luggage to Denver. The interior materials are competent, not luxurious. Long-term durability data over 10 and 15 years in American winters with American road salt on American potholes genuinely does not exist yet because the cars haven't been here that long. Anyone telling you they know how these hold up at 200,000 miles is guessing. And there's a real question about service. A car is only as good as the network that repairs it, and building a dealer and parts network across a country the size of the United States takes years and enormous capital. That's a genuine advantage American and Japanese brands hold, and it's not a small one. So the fair verdict is this: it is not a bad car, it is a genuinely good small car, sold at a price that shouldn't be possible, with real unknowns around long-term durability and support in a market it hasn't entered, which is a much more threatening sentence than "it's junk," because "it's junk" is a problem that solves itself. It's genuinely good and we can't match the price is a problem that only gets worse while you wait. Which brings us to the question that everyone watching this in America has been waiting to ask. If this car exists, and it's this good, and it's this cheap, why can't I buy one? You can't buy one because your government has built a wall specifically to make sure you can't, and it is one of the most consequential trade decisions of the last 50 years. The mechanism is straightforward. Chinese-built electric vehicles entering the United States face tariffs that were escalated to 100%, a rate that isn't designed to make imports more expensive. A 25% tariff makes something more expensive. A 100% tariff is not a tax, it's a door with no handle on the outside. And then, layered on top of that, there's a second wall that gets far less attention and may ultimately matter more: rules restricting Chinese-developed connected vehicle hardware and software in cars sold in America. The argument there isn't about price at all. It's that a modern car is a rolling sensor platform, cameras, microphones, GPS, cellular connectivity, and now LiDAR that constantly maps its environment and phones home with software updates. You can debate how seriously to take that concern. Reasonable people do. But it means that even if the tariff came down tomorrow, there's a second barrier standing behind it that has nothing to do with economics. So the wall is real, it's high, and by the current politics of both American parties, it is not coming down soon. Here's the thing though, the wall works on cars. It does not work on the capability, and that distinction is the actual subject of this video. Look at what's happening in Europe, because Europe is the experiment America is watching in real time. The Seagull went on sale there under a different name at a much higher price. European homologation, European crash and safety requirements, European tariffs, European dealer margins push it into a range comfortably north of 20,000, not 11,999. And it is selling anyway, because it turns out that even at double its home price, a well-built electric car with modern technology at the bottom of the market is a product European buyers actively wanted and nobody was offering them. And Chinese manufacturers didn't stop at exporting. They started building factories inside Europe, in Hungary, in Turkey, because a car assembled inside the tariff zone isn't an import anymore. It's a local product employing local workers, which makes it politically very difficult to attack. Now look at North America. Chinese automakers have been building capacity in Mexico, and under the North American Trade Agreement, vehicles assembled in North America move across borders duty-free. That is not a loophole anyone is hiding. It is a widely discussed, extensively analyzed, entirely legal path, and the American auto industry has been extremely vocal about it. One industry figure called it a Trojan horse for a sector that accounts for roughly 1 in 9 American manufacturing jobs. So the wall buys time. It does not buy permanence. And the honest question is what America does with the time, which brings me to the part Detroit does not enjoy discussing. Let's be fair and look at the American response on its merits, because it's more interesting than the doom narrative suggests. The Chevrolet Bolt came back at $28,995, and it's a genuinely good car, more range than the old one, faster charging, a native NACS port so it can use Tesla's supercharger network without an adapter. And GM is ending it in 2028. Ford is building an entirely new platform from scratch, the Universal EV architecture, with a mid-size electric pickup targeted around $30,000. That's a serious, expensive, ground-up engineering effort aimed squarely at the affordability problem, and it deserves credit. And then there's the most interesting American answer of all, which is Slate. Slate Auto priced its electric pickup at $24,950, and it got there through a philosophy that is almost the mirror image of BYD's. BYD got cheap by owning everything and manufacturing at colossal scale. Slate got cheap by deleting things, crank windows, no infotainment screen at all, a single gray composite body with no paint options, because skipping the paint shop entirely removes one of the most expensive capital investments in an entire automobile factory. That is real, clever, genuinely American engineering, solving a cost problem with a design idea instead of a supply chain. But look at the numbers honestly. 24,950 with crank windows and no screen versus 11,999 with a touchscreen, over-the-air updates, and LiDAR on the roof. That gap is not a gap in effort, or intelligence, or engineering talent. American engineers are not worse. That gap is a gap in industrial capability, in owning the components, in supply chain density, in accumulated manufacturing scale. And those things take a decade to build and cannot be legislated into existence in a budget cycle. So here's the reframe, and it's the point of this entire video. We've been treating the $11,000 car as a consumer story. Cheap car, big number, shocking headline. It isn't a consumer story. The car is a receipt. For 30 years, the dominant idea in American business was that manufacturing was a low-value commodity activity. The real value was in design, brand, software, and intellectual property. Let someone else handle the dirty work of physically making things. That's the low-margin part. The $11,000 car is the invoice for that idea. It is proof that manufacturing capability is itself a technology, that the ability to make 10 million of something cheaply is not a lesser skill than designing it. It is a different skill. It compounds over decades, and once you've let it decay, you cannot buy it back quickly at any price. And that leads to something genuinely worth sitting with. America still holds a commanding position in things China has struggled to replicate: the most advanced semiconductor design, the frontier of artificial intelligence, the software layer that increasingly defines what a car actually is. Tesla still holds roughly half the American EV market and still has the most sophisticated vehicle software on the road. But here's the uncomfortable symmetry. The Chinese automakers are climbing the software curve right now. That LiDAR system on a bottom-of-the-market car is exactly what that climb looks like. And America is not climbing the manufacturing curve at the same speed in the other direction. Software can be caught up. It's talent, capital, and time. Industrial capability at that scale is roads, ports, trained workforces, tooling, supplier ecosystems, and 20 years of institutional memory about how to make things cheaply without making them badly. One of those catches up faster than the other, and it isn't the one America is counting on. So, will the $11,000 car actually shake the American EV industry? It already has, not by arriving, by existing. Every product plan, every price target, every affordability roadmap inside every American automaker has been rewritten in the shadow of a number they currently cannot match. The wall holds for now. Whether it holds for a decade, and whether that decade gets used to rebuild industrial capability or just to postpone the reckoning, that's the actual story, and it's going to play out over the next few years in factory announcements that never make the front page. Because the real players in this game were never the ones making noise. They're the ones quietly building the capacity to make 10 million of something while everyone else was arguing about it. If you got something out of this, subscribe and turn on notifications. We go deep on the technology behind stories like this every week, and the next one is about where America's remaining advantage actually lives and how fragile it is. Thanks for watching.